Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 4 in the discourse Shlach Lecha, which is the 5th discourse in the great book B'Shasha Ekdimu, Tafresh Ayin Beis 5672. We are in the middle of chapter 18. And here we go. We left off with a question yesterday, not the question that he asks, but that is asked in the Maamor, but a question that I didn't understand, and I still don't have clarity. But I think it'll probably clarify as we're learning. So let's see how that will work. The main point that we were learning was that he further solidified the idea that the reason we say regarding the Atzilus, the lights of Atzilus, the Kav, the lights of the Atzilus, the lights of the first world of Atzilus, which is the world of emanation, the lights of the Sefirot, which come from the Kav. The Kav is the thread of infinite light that reemerges after the original concealment of the infinite light of God. That's the Kav. And the Kav itself, as it pulls from higher, is not completely yesh me'ayin, which means something from nothing, but rather is what we refer to it as Giluy Hahelim. Giluy Hahelim means it's a revelation of something that has already been there, but in potential and hidden. In other words, in the Or Ein Sof itself, there is already room and space and possibility and a source. We can already call it a source for the light of the Kav, which the light of the Kav is the source for the lights of the 10 Sefirot. And as we learned earlier, the lights of the 10 Sefirot have already somewhat of a design. So how can the Or Ein Sof have already a source for lights and for particular powers that have already designed? And that is because because in the most subtle of subtle ways, in the Or Ein Sof itself, there is also already a beginning of 10 Sefirot, the Esa Sfiras Agnuzos, that idea. And therefore, from the 10 Sfiras Agnuzos, from those 10 hidden Sfiros, the emergence of the Kav, and then the emergence of the 10 Oiros, the 10 lights of Atzilus, is considered already a continuation from what was, not a breakthrough of something new, but a continuation, a hidden potential coming forth. And with that, in order to solidify that, he proved that from this that the Eitz Chaim was suggesting that there shouldn't have to have been a complete tzimtzum, a complete contraction initially on the infinite light in order to pull forth the Kav. Hashem could have left over a little bit of the light, the beam of light that was later going to be re-emerged. God could have just left that over. Why? He didn't have to take it away completely. And that's the Eitz Chaim's premise, the Arizal's premise, that God didn't have to remove that light completely. And the only reason he did was in order for the formation of the vessels. But for the light itself that was going to be after the tzimtzum, he didn't have to. Now, if we are going to say, this is the main point that we learned earlier, if we are going to say that the Or Ein Sof, that's before the tzimtzum, is simple, and there is it has nothing in it, it doesn't even have the tiniest, slightest slant of 10 Sefirot, and it is utterly, absolutely infinite, how in the world are you going to then produce a Kav directly without first shutting down the light? Meaning, how can you take a limited light, which limited means it has already somewhat of a design, and have that just come about from the infinite light directly without an interruption? If there's an interruption, good. What once was the infinite simple light, infinite and boundless and indescribed, once was. God then pulls that away and reemerges a finite energy. That's not the question. But to be able to go directly just by minimizing the infinite light and leave over the light of the kav, that doesn't make any sense. However, based on what we just learned, that in the pre-tzimtzum light, there is a source for the hidden 10 esespheres, the 10 spheres agnuzais, the 10 hidden attributes are already existing. Soon we'll learn about how they exist, but we can already say they are there, albeit in a very, very hidden state, but they're there. Then we can say, from that light didn't have to be dimmed completely. That light should have been able to be present, continue to be present, just by what God should have just done is removed all the rest of the light. That's not the 10 hidden sphirot. And all the rest of the light, that of course he had to hide. But the light of the 10 sphirot, he could have, that is in the Or Ein Sof, he could have left that shining, and from there pull the kav. Why did he have to obliterate or hide or conceal or all the light, which he really did? But why? That was the question of the Eitz Chaim. Now we understand the question. So from the question itself of the Arizal, we see the premise that the Arizal understood, and therefore if the Arizal understood, so then that's the truth, that even in the Or Ein Sof, there is already a beginning, if we might say, for the light of the kav and for the 10 spheros, because there is hidden 10 spheres agnuzais, which are already considered the beginning of something. And that's why the Eitz Chaim was of the suggestion that even though it's infinite, but it's still already the beginning of what is to be, and therefore you didn't have to dismiss it completely. Could have dimmed it, diminished it, but not completely. Okay. That was the premise that we learned till now. And now we're continuing, and he says, however, we still need to understand, give this, okay, we'll accept this, and we'll say that there is a continuity between the light before the tzimtzum and the kav, the light that comes after the tzimtzum, eventually evolving into the 10 spheres. There is a continuity, there's a continuation. There's no, why? Because we're arguing that there is a resemblance, that what once was in a very hidden potential has now just emerged, just now come out into, expressed itself into an expression. But really it was there already before, so that's the continuation. But he says, how can you say that? What's the challenge? The challenge is, since in the final analysis, since for whatever reason, God did completely hide the light, he did shut down the initial light utterly, because there was a tzimtzum arishon, and tzimtzum arishon means that the lights were shut down till there was zilch, till there was absolutely no light at all, a total emptiness, a total void of light. If you come to zero and then afterwards you pull something forth, a new revelation, then there is a disconnect. And if there's a disconnect, then what is coming post the darkness versus what was pre the darkness are unrelated to each other. Because there was first a complete no, and then you're going back to a yeah. So since the no precedes the yeah, and the no is an absolute no, that means that whatever is coming afterwards has no continuation to what was before. So if so, how can we say that the continuing lights, the kav, and everything that continues is not something new, it's still a continuation from what was before? That's his question he's asking now. In other words, earlier we said we didn't need to have this tzimtzum. We didn't have to. In order to pull the kav, it wasn't necessary to come to a complete zero on the light, complete dimming on the light. But after, yes, hypothetically we didn't have to, but practically, in the reality, God did diminish the light down to complete zero, to complete nothing. Why? Good, we gave a reason. That wasn't because of the light, that was because of the vessels, in order to the vessels to the forge. But once we've already experienced that absolute and complete and real void, how can anything after the void be a continuation of what was before the void? That's his question. Let's read inside. It's a new question. We need to understand that. Bottom line, the kav, when the kav comes forth, this thread, it comes via and after the tzimtzum, after the contraction. And remember, the first contraction is a complete contraction. Or at least that's what he's thinking now, as we're going to see soon. Which was first. The gam lefi mashmas the Eitz Chaim, and even according to the implication of the Arizal, of the Eitz Chaim, that it didn't have to go dim completely, go void completely, and then reassert the kav. It could have been left over the kav to begin with, which implies a connection, which implies that the kav is a continuation that was before. But nevertheless, but he's not buying that. Why? After everything said and done, there was a tzimtzum in the light of the kav, which means the light of the kav was first turned to zero, because the light of the kav was first part of the Or Ein Sof, and it was turned to zero, and only afterwards it was a turning back on. That would seem that it's a complete interruption from what was before. So how do then we say it's a gilui, it's a revelation of what was hahelim of the concealment, which means that there's nothing new really happening afterwards. It's just an emergence of a hidden potential. How can we say it's b'chinas gilui hahelim gam mishar shem mekoyroi, that from its source and its root, it's a revelation? It's from the 10 spherois hagnuzos that's in the Or Ein Sof. It's just a manifestation of that. Wait, there was a tzimtzum. And doesn't the tzimtzum completely wipe out anything that was before and start a new page? It's as if time starts now. There is no history anymore. A complete cut off from what was before. So to answer that, he's going to answer, interesting answer, that it's not like we think. That this that we say there was a complete tzimtzum is only regarding the higher element of the Or Ein Sof. The higher element of the Or Ein Sof, the Or Ein Sof that's above and beyond the 10 hidden spheros that's in the Or Ein Sof. The Or Ein Sof that we called yesterday Or Ein Sof A, the higher level of the Or Ein Sof. The Or Ein Sof where it's spheros and kates, where the spheros are limitless, literally. They're not. That was completely hidden to the point of zero. Because from there, the kav cannot even come from. The kav is a light, as we discussed yesterday, that the student is able to receive. The Or Ein Sof is the light of the teacher that the student doesn't have any relationship whatsoever. So the teacher has to cut that off completely. And indeed, over there was a complete tzimtzum that cut it off completely. However, he's going to explain that the element of the Or Ein Sof, where there is already a hidden potential for 10 spheros, as we call it Or Ein Sof B, the lower nether element of the Or Ein Sof. Yes, from here, although there was a tzimtzum, there was a contraction in this light in order to emerge the kav, but it's not as complete and extreme like the tzimtzum in the higher level of the Or Ein Sof. So what he's basically saying is going to reveal two levels in tzimtzum. In tzimtzum harishon, there are two. The tzimtzum is different when it comes to the pre-tzimtzum light. It differentiates between the two. Since we said that in the Or Ein Sof there's kind of, so to speak, two dimensions, so the tzimtzum that's coming to counter the light is also operating on two dimensions. To the Or Ein Sof, it is completely blocking, but to the Esespheres Hagnuzos, that's called the Shayrish HaKav, it's not completely blocking, it's of a lesser block, and therefore, when the Kav is going to emerge from the Or Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum, since the Tzimtzum regarding the light, the source of the Kav, was not complete, that's why the Kav is still a continuation, because something is left over. It's not, it didn't get completely dark, in as much as the source of the Kav is concerned. There's new stuff we're learning, new amazing ideas we're learning every time we're learning. So that's what he explains over here. Ach inyan, who the answer is, the lefi shitazu, according to this opinion, the esa spheres agnuzes and sharshei ha'oros, that the 10 hidden spheres are the roots of the lights. Remember, we learned the Ramak, Ramosha Cordova says, that the 10 hidden spheros are not the source of the lights, they're the source of the vessels. Similar to the Rishima, the source of the vessels. That's what the Ramosha Cordova mentioned, the Ramak, Cordovero mentioned, which he brought a couple of chapters ago where he mentioned that. But we're following the Ari, that the 10 hidden spheres is the source of the lights, that even in the lights there is somewhat of design. The lights are not utterly pashut. And even in the lights there is some kind of already slanting. And even in the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, there exists already this presence of 10 hidden spheros. So according to this opinion, he says, then we'll see that Tzimtzum was in the Tzimtzum was not as complete and as thorough when it comes to this particular aspect of the Or Ein Sof. According to this opinion, the Esrei Agnuz and Sharshei Oros are the roots of the lights. Umisham Nimshach Kav, and from there comes the Kav. Tzarech loymar de be'emes. We have to say the be'emes that in truth, einoi doima hatzimtzum the Or Ein Sof. You can't compare the tzimtzum, the blockage, the contraction of, or the removal of the Or Ein Sof lahat tzimtzum shebesherish u'makar hakav, to the tzimtzum that took place in the root and the source of the kav, which is within the Or Ein Sof, the 10 hidden spheres, which they are the root and the source of the kav. The tzimtzum that applied to this light was not such a thorough tzimtzum. Now, we're going to skip the parentheses over here and going to go almost to the end of this chapter, because this is a parenthetical thought. I want to just finish the thought so that we don't lose it, and then we'll go back to the parentheses. Because there's a whole bunch of, there's a parentheses, and then there's another small parentheses, and there are 3 small parentheses, parenthetical thoughts within the larger parentheses. So we're going to skip all of that. I'm going to go to 2 lines before the end of the chapter. And now he completes, in order to complete the thought, that tzimtzum sheba Or Ein Sof, because the tzimtzum that was in the grandiose Or Ein Sof, in the Or Ein Sof on the higher level, hu b'bchinas siluk, was true. For that, in order to produce the kav, there needed to be a complete siluk, a complete removal. This almus legamri, it had to become completely hidden and blocked to the point that there was no trace left of it at all. Nothing. Besides the Or Agvul, the Reshimu, but that's a different story. But from the light element of it, there was nothing left over. Which isn't the case in the level of tzimtzum that affected the root and the source of the kav, which is a lower level within the Or Ein Sof itself. And that level was contracted, was part of the tzimtzum, but the tzimtzum affected it in a lesser way. Left over some of it so that there can be a continuity from that to what happens after the tzimtzum. It doesn't break off completely the before then the after. So we're not completely starting a new chapter. There's a little memory of what was before. There's a little leakage, so to speak, of what was before of the Or Ein Sof. Even though it's Or Ein Sof literally, but since it's Or Ein Sof with a slight slant of 10 spheres agnuzos, it not only could remain, but it has to remain. Not in its full brightness. Again, he's not saying there was no tzimtzum. There was a tzimtzum. There was no contraction. Not saying there's no contraction. There was a contraction. But to a lesser degree, and when we say a lesser, we don't only mean quantitatively, we mean qualitatively, a whole different type of tzimtzum in this, versus the tzimtzum that was in the Or Ein Sof, which cut us off completely from the inside of the Or Ein Sof, because as there, that could not carry over at all to after the tzimtzum. Because if it would carry over even in the slightest bit to after the tzimtzum, there couldn't possibly be any creation in any world. Okay. And this idea is going to explain in chapter 19, in the next chapter. But now let's go back and start exploring his his parenthetical thought in the midst of this idea. Perek nisbar. Now, on the notion that he said before, that in order to produce the kav, there was, regarding the higher level, regarding the Or Ein Sof itself, there needed to be a complete cutoff, or else the kav could not, and remember the example we gave earlier, like a teacher who has vast knowledge, in order for him to produce a concept that is palpable to a student, he needs to first shut down his entire intelligence, go to zero, and then pull, and then he produces a new idea. So this is the idea that he said, right? But he's gonna, which makes sense to us, right? To get a kav, which is a light that illuminates creation, we're gonna have to shut down the Or Ein Sof completely first. But now he's gonna challenge that, and he's gonna say, hold it. It seems like this is a given, that there can't be any passageway from the Or Ein Sof, from the original Or Ein Sof, to the Or Ein Sof presented by the kav. Kav is also Or Ein Sof. It's a kav of Or Ein Sof, but it's a kav. It's only a line of the Or Ein Sof, whatever that means. And so there has to be a complete break-off from that. The question he's going to ask is, we said earlier in chapter 8, earlier in the Maamor, that the main purpose of the tzimtzum wasn't so much for the kav. The main purpose of the tzimtzum was to produce kalim. Kalim, they are the vessels. They are a product of the tzimtzum. But the lights, which are the soul, the energy that flows through the spheros, they are not so based in tzimtzum. If that's the case, then why are we insisting suddenly over here so strongly that, for the Or Ein Sof, we have to cut off completely no matter what? Only to the nether element of the Or Ein Sof, to the 10 spheres that are there can be a lesser tzimtzum, so there can be a continuity. But when it comes to the Or Ein Sof, we have to cut it off completely. Didn't we say earlier that the primary function of the tzimtzum was to produce the kalim? But for the Or, we're not so concerned about the original light. That's what he is challenging over here. El Perek Ches, and earlier in chapter 8, that's 10 chapters ago, so don't feel so bad if you don't remember it. Nisbar de Bederach Kla, we explained earlier that in general, Ikar Inyanat Tzimtzum Hu B'Shvila Kelim, the main idea of the Tzimtzum was for the Kelim, Loi B'Shvila Or, not for the light. Look as this idea is expounded on in a special drush called Gimel Minei Adam, which is, I think, from the Tzemach Tzedek, from his grandfather. Look in that discourse is where he explains this, he elucidates this idea better. V'hainu, and this idea that we don't really need the tzimtzum so much for the light, that the main purpose of the tzimtzum was for the vessels, but not for the lights, is further illustrated by the fact that although God shut the lights down completely, what did he do afterwards? He didn't emanate a new light. He brought back the old light. That's the meaning of kav. Kav is not, okay, the old light is gone and God is now producing a whole new type of light. Kav means, this is what the Arizal says, choizer v'he'er. Choizer v'he'er means he went back and opened the window again to allow some of that brilliant light to come out. Only a little bit, but he's reopening the window of the original light. That's what the kav is. It's a reintroduction of Or Ein Sof into the black hole. So first there's a total blackout, but then there's a reintroduction of the original light, which further illustrates the idea that even regarding the brilliant Or Ein Sof, not just the nether element of it, just the Or Ein Sof in general, the kav is not so cut off. The kav is not completely, a non-continuation, because the concept of Kabbalah is that there is a reintroduction of that light. So it seems like we're coming back to what once was. It's not like a breakaway from what was. So he explains, no. What we have to understand is that when the light went to zero, and even if the light is coming back, the new light and the old light are completely different. Because when the light comes back, it's coming back after a complete removal of it. And once it's coming back after a complete absence of lit, the new light cannot be said that it's the same light that it was before. It's attached. The point that we're saying that it was reintroduced, we're trying to emphasize that it's not cut off and that there is an attachment. There is it's plugged in. It's not disconnected, but the quality of it is completely metamorphosized. Why? Because there was, had Hashem not gone to zero, and had he just left over a little bit of the light, the same crumb of light, the same little beam of light, had he done that, then it would be a continuum of what was before. But since practically, what did he do? He made no and then yeah, then the light is a whole different quality. And he's going to compare it to an interesting thing. We know that we all have our main power, the main highest form of energy in the human being is the brain power. The power of our mind. Now it says that some of the energy of the mind actually leaks out. There's a leak in the brain. No one should get scared, but it leaks. The excessive energy, because there's so much energy in the brain, it protrudes from the brain. Some energy goes out and does not remain in the pool of the brain and somehow go through the nerve system, whatever, but rather it seeps out from the brain and goes into the skull, passes through the skull, and emerges on the other side into the hair follicles. And it's explanation in Chassidus that it gives in Kabbalah why there's a lot of hair precisely around the head. And in general, there's a lot of hair, extra hair by a person in all the places where there is intense energy. That's why a person is hairy around their brain, because there's intense energy around their brain. By their armpits, around their mouth, around their bottom of the chin, because that's the end of the head, and since it's the culmination of the head. Again, there is an intensification of energy on the bottom of the skull. Armpits is because it's next to the heart. That's another major part of the operational. And then around the reproductive part of the human being, there's again more here, because that's in the power of reproduction, of creating children. There is enormous energy. Like we all know that sexual energy is very powerful energy. And that's the reason why over there as well, there is a lot of hair. In other words, there could be hair all over the body, but particularly next to the higher, most potent powers of where the energy is intense, that's where there's hair. So, we're all going to understand that when we say that inside your hair is flowing some of your brain power, can we say it's a crumb of your qualitatively? Is it just that it's so tiny, but it's a crumb of a person's intelligence? Is that really what it is? Because it leaked from the brain. And hypothetically, if you will get like a million hair will come out, and you'll suck out the energy from the tube. Every hair is like a tube, and you'll extract the energy from every hair, put it together, you'll be able to get a sharp mind. That will never happen, even if you have a billion hair. And the reason is because it's not just quantitatively a tiny bit, it's qualitatively a whole different energy. It can't produce a brain, it can't produce a mind. And the reason for that is because it went through the skull. And when it's going through the skull is a complete the skull is a complete block. It's a thick, dense bone. It goes no, and then it returns again, yeah. It's a no and a yeah. If it would be just left over from what was, then maybe there would be a continuum. But since it's breaking through, first a no and then a yeah, that's why it's considered a cutoff. And that's why what's coming out on the other side is not of the quality, it's not of the quality, not even a minutia, small little something of the same quality. It's already completely different. And the same idea he's saying about the kav is that the kav, true, we're saying that that it's chayze v'heir, that Hashem reopened and re-emanates, but the fact that the re-emanation comes after it's closed off completely then what is being produced is not of that same quality. So what that means is that even for that he's basically again supporting the idea that we're saying now, that between the Or Ein Sof and the Kav there has to be a complete block, a complete no. Let's read it inside. But nevertheless, the tzimtzum hu b'chinas his'almus mamish. The tzimtzum is a complete disconnect from what was before, and there is no continuity of what was before. However, it's important to note that's only regarding the Or Ein Sof A, like we discussed earlier, because that's the main point he's making over here in this discourse. That's only on the higher level of the Or. From there, you have to cut off completely. But from the Or Ein Sof B, which means the lower element of the Or Ein Sof, the source of the Kav in the Or Ein Sof, the 10 spheres, it's not a complete breakaway. And that's what he's explaining now further. This fits according to the opinion, Namshachas HaKav, that the Kav comes directly Ma'or Ein Sof Mamish. Like the Shita of the Ramak, or Moshe Gedava, who says that the Kav, there's no Esses Spherois, Hagenuzos, the hidden spheroids, the 10 spheres, are not, they're the source of vessels. They're not for the Kav. The Kav is directly plugging into the Or Ein Sof. So if you're going directly into Or Ein Sof, you have to cut that, you have to block that completely in order to have a Kav. Al Kein Tzarech Loima, you have to say that Tzimtzum Lagabe HaKav Hu Gam Kein B'Bchinas Siluk. Then we have to say that the Tzimtzum was a complete siluk, a complete hiding. This almost legamri, and completely hiding, and then removing it to some totality. Rak only shamshachas hakavu aydesha or choyze veheir. It's only when we say completely disconnected, that does not take away from the fact that on the other hand, we're not considering it a new light, but rather it's a reintroduction of the light. So it's both are true. On the one hand, it's a complete hisalmus, a complete hiding, and on the other hand, it's a reintroduction. And what do you get? Since the root from where it's coming from is from the Or HaBeligvul, again, according to this opinion, that it's coming directly from the infinite light of the infinite. That is reshining. So even though it's coming through a complete no, which means it's leaping over, it's leaping past the tzimtzum. There was a tzimtzum, a complete block. And then after the block, it's jumping past the block and re-emerging. So he says it's kamoy hamshachas hasayres. It's compared to the drawing of here, derech hefsek hakol goyles, which goes through a complete interruption of the skull. So on the one hand, that makes it be completely new, not a continuation of what was before. But nevertheless, it's still touching the davuk ba'or ein sof. It's still, the reason we're saying chayzer v'heir means it's tracing itself back to the Or Ein Sof. It's not disconnected, because if it would be disconnected completely, it wouldn't be called light. Because light is always a light can't be disconnected from the source. It's still connected to the Or Ein Sof. It means that the light of the Kav is still connected to the Or Ein Sof, and it's still reflecting the Ma'or, the source of the light, albeit in the most minuscule way, because it went through the block of the skull, or it went through the tzimtzum. So that's considered a no. But then the fact that it's choyze v'heir means God reopens the light, so the light should be the light on the one that is a continuation from what was before, meaning it's attached, but on the other hand, it's like totally new. So it's both at the same time. We're going to have to leave this last idea to further develop Ezras Hashem in tomorrow's class. Meanwhile, everyone stay well, and let's greet Mashiach today.